In 1865 Virginia, a soldier returned home and found his wife remarried to his brother. The war had taken everything. Not just the fields and the forests, not just the smoke and the fire, but pieces of the people who survived it. In 1865 Virginia, the land still smelled of gunpowder and grief, a bitter reminder that nothing would ever be the same. Among the shattered homes and broken towns, one soldier trudged through mud and memory, believing that love could somehow survive the chaos of war. He had left a wife he adored, a small house filled with laughter, and a promise whispered in the twilight of a summer evening. "I'll come back to you," he had said, holding her hands in his rough, calloused ones. She had smiled, eyes bright with hope, but deep down, she feared the war would take him, as it had taken so many others. The first months of battle had been merciless. Cannon fire shattered the sky, bullets tore through the earth, and friends vanished in the blink of an eye. Letters became lifelines, a fragile thread connecting the soldier to the life he had left behind. Yet, even letters were slow, unreliable. Some never arrived at all. And as time stretched into years, that silence became a cruel companion. Back in Virginia, the townsfolk endured their own quiet horrors. Families waited at windows for shadows on dusty roads. Children grew up with empty chairs at the dinner table. And the women, held their hearts in trembling hands, torn between mourning and the need to survive. His wife was no exception. Each day, she tended the garden, cooked for neighbors, and kept the home alive, even as her heart ached for the soldier who might never return. In the army camps, the soldier clung to memories like talismans. The smell of her hair, the sound of her laugh, the way she pressed her hand into his, it was all he had to fight for. Letters he sent were filled with dreams of the day he would walk through their door again. But the war, merciless and indifferent, had a way of rewriting fates. Battles raged, villages burned, and sometimes the very people you loved were forced to adapt in ways you could never imagine. He dreamed of her at night, the firelight dancing in the cabin, the wind whispering through the trees, the gentle hush of Virginia summers that now seemed impossibly distant. Each dream carried him forward, made him believe that hope was still alive. Yet the longer he stayed away, the more fragile that hope became. There were nights when he wondered if the world had forgotten him entirely, if she had forgotten him. The thought was unbearable, yet he could not let it go. He kept marching, kept surviving, because love demanded it, even in a land where love was often punished by war. And then, finally, the war ended. Virginia lay in ruins, scarred by the battles that had swept across it like storms. The soldier packed his few belongings, his heart heavy but determined. He imagined the reunion, the embrace, the whispered promises renewed. Every step toward home was a step toward the life he had envisioned. But fate, as it so often does, had other plans. The house at the end of the lane looked the same from a distance. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney. The garden still bloomed. And yet, something was wrong. A shadow moved behind the curtains, a figure that should not have been there. A warmth, a familiarity, but twisted into something he could not yet understand. He slowed his pace. His chest tightened. The world he had fought to return to was no longer the one he had left behind. Every heartbeat screamed that this homecoming would not be simple. Something had changed. Something permanent. And when he stepped onto the porch, the sight that greeted him would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and family. The war had taken much, but it had spared nothing when it came to the human heart. The soldier's hands trembled as he opened the mailbox, or rather, the pile of dust and forgotten papers where the mailbox had once been. He had imagined this moment for months, even years, imagining her face lighting up, her hands trembling as she read his words. But now, all he found were scattered envelopes, yellowed with age, some torn, others damp from storms, and many never delivered at all. Every letter he had sent was a message in a bottle, cast into an ocean of chaos. He had written of longing, of survival, of dreams for the future they would rebuild together. "I will come home," he had written again and again, believing that the ink on paper could bridge the miles, the blood, and the fear. But letters are fragile. Sometimes the wind carries them. Sometimes the enemy intercepts them. And sometimes they vanish entirely, lost to history or to the hands of fate. Back home, his wife had waited. She pressed each letter to her chest, reading them under candlelight when the world was silent. Each word from him was a thread holding her heart together. But months of silence began to gnaw at the edges of hope. One letter missed, then another. Then the months stretched into years, the empty spaces between words becoming impossible to ignore. She grieved quietly, as women of her time often did, caught between love and the reality of a world at war. Meanwhile, the soldier believed she had forgotten him. The thought clawed at his heart. Had she moved on? Found comfort in someone else? Every shadow in a passing town, every glance from a stranger, made him wonder if the life he fought for had already vanished. He imagined her smiling, perhaps with someone else, imagining the letters he sent lying unopened, collecting dust, and it twisted his stomach with a mix of grief and rage. And then there was his brother, loyal, strong, ever present in the quiet moments of family memory. Back home, his brother had been a friend, a confidant, a shadow in the background of life. But as the letters faltered and hope faded, the lines of loyalty began to blur. How much could a man console a widow? How much could a brother be tempted when love and loneliness collide? The soldier thought of the letters, of all the words that had never reached her. He thought of the garden he had planted in his mind, where love should have grown undisturbed. But the garden had wilted, choked by absence, and something else had taken root in its place, a seed of betrayal he could not yet see. When he finally boarded the wagon that would take him home, he carried more than the fatigue of war. He carried the weight of uncertainty, the haunting suspicion that the life he imagined might no longer exist. Each mile closer to home was a drumbeat of anxiety. What would he find when he opened the door? Would the warmth he remembered still be there, or would it have been replaced by shadows? Virginia stretched out before him, fields scarred by cannon fire, houses patched and leaning, roads lined with memories he did not recognize. The air smelled of rain and smoke, of soot and sorrow. And as he rode past familiar landmarks, he felt the first pang of a fear he could not shake. Maybe some things, once lost, could never be reclaimed. The letters that never arrived had done their work quietly, invisibly, unraveling the threads of trust and expectation. And now, as he approached the home he had dreamed of for so long, he was about to discover how deadly silence could be, not just in war, but in love. Because what he would see first through the window was a life that had moved on, a life he had never imagined, one that would shatter his heart before he even stepped inside. The road home was long, dust curling in the wind, twisting like the memories he carried. Every step of the wagon felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself was trying to warn him. He had survived cannon fire, bayonets, starvation, and the endless march of war, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The moment when he would finally see her again. Virginia unfolded beneath him, familiar yet altered. Trees that once stood straight now leaned like old men. The river that had sparkled in sunlight was muddied, sluggish, scarred by the passing of soldiers and time. Houses were patched with planks, smoke curling from uneven chimneys. And at the end of the lane, he saw it, his home. Or at least, what he had always called home. He remembered the way the garden had smelled in spring, the sweet scent of roses mingling with the sharp tang of fresh earth. He remembered evenings on the porch, the hush of summer nights broken only by crickets and the occasional owl. He imagined her there, waiting for him, her hands trembling as she ran to embrace him. But the house seemed different, quieter in some ways, too quiet, and yet alive. Movement behind the curtains, shadows shifting. He dismounted from the wagon, boots crunching in gravel, and the air felt heavy, thick with something he could not name. Excitement? Fear? a bitter mixture of both. His chest tightened, and a cold sweat formed along his spine. He called her name softly at first, almost like a prayer. The wind carried his voice into the garden, through the open windows, into the rooms he had known since boyhood. But no familiar smile appeared. Instead, a figure stepped forward from behind the curtains, someone he knew too well, and yet someone he had never expected to see in that moment. It was his brother, standing there, the air around him heavy, tense. For a heartbeat, the soldier thought he was dreaming. Perhaps the war had hollowed his mind so much that reality had become a trick of the senses. But no, his brother's face was real, and so was the quiet, unspoken understanding that passed between them. The soldier's gaze shifted, searching for the one person he had left behind, the woman whose memory had been a lifeline through the darkest nights of battle. And then he saw her. She was inside the house, framed by the doorway, eyes wide, mouth trembling, hands wringing a handkerchief. The sight stabbed him sharper than any musket ball ever could. For a moment, time froze. He could hear the distant crow of a rooster, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint creak of the house settling. Yet beneath it all was a silence far heavier than any sound. A silence born from unspoken choices, from betrayal, from love twisted by absence. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear the world apart until it revealed the truth. But words failed him. All that remained was the pounding of his heart, the heat of anger, and the hollow ache of disbelief. He realized in that instant that the homecoming he had imagined, warm, tender, forgiving, was gone. Instead, he was left with questions. Questions that gnawed at his bones. How could this happen? How long had it been? And most terrifying of all, why had no one thought to wait for him? The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of roses and smoke. The soldier took a hesitant step forward, then another, each one heavier than the last. He was walking into a life he no longer recognized, a world where love had been tested beyond endurance, and where the lines between loyalty and betrayal had blurred into something unrecognizable. Nothing would ever be the same again. The soldier's eyes locked on his brother, and for a moment, the world narrowed to a single, unbearable truth: betrayal. How could this man, his own blood, stand there with calm in his posture, in the house that was once sacred, as if he belonged there? The question burned hotter than the summer sun. Every step he had taken home, every letter he had written, every lonely night endured in the trenches, all of it seemed meaningless now. His brother's expression was unreadable, calm on the surface, but in the shadows of his eyes, a storm raged. Secrets had been kept, not just out of malice, but from fear, from longing, from the unthinkable temptations that sometimes strike in silence when the world is at its cruelest. He had watched over her when she cried herself to sleep. He had tended the garden when the letters failed. He had been a comforting presence, a lifeline when hope seemed lost. But presence, he realized, is a dangerous thing. It can turn loyalty into ownership, care into desire. And now, standing before the soldier, it felt like an accusation. Every movement of his brother, his calm stance, the slight hesitation in his voice, was loaded with unspoken confessions. How long had this been brewing? How long had grief and loneliness twisted their lives while the war raged on? The soldier's mind raced, the memory of every day he had spent in the army flashing before him. The cannon fire, the frozen nights, the friends who never returned. He had fought to survive, to come home to this life, only to discover that survival did not guarantee the world would wait for him. His brother's lips moved slightly, as if to explain, but the soldier's anger erupted before words could even form. "How?" he demanded, voice low but shaking. "How could you, my own brother, take what was mine?" There was a silence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath them. His brother's gaze dropped to the floor, shame and fear flickering across his features. "It wasn't like that," he said finally. "You were gone. You might never have come back. I never wanted to hurt you." The words did nothing to soften the blow. The soldier felt his chest tighten, a knot of grief, fury, and disbelief. Betrayal is a quiet poison, one that seeps into your veins unnoticed until it paralyzes the heart. And yet, beneath the fury, there was also understanding, perhaps even sorrow. He had seen the devastation of war. He had seen what absence can do to a human soul. He understood the loneliness, the fear, the impossible choices people make when survival is at stake. But understanding does not heal wounds, and it does not erase the sight of his wife, standing just beyond, her face pale and eyes wide with terror and guilt. He had returned, expecting warmth, safety, love, and found a fracture so deep it could swallow the family whole. The brother's secret was not just about desire. It was about fear, about the impossibility of waiting, about the human instinct to cling to comfort when the world has been stripped bare. And yet, knowing this did not make the betrayal any less sharp, any less real. The wind rattled the window panes, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth, a reminder that the world outside moved on even when hearts were breaking. In that moment, the soldier realized something terrible. He had survived the war only to enter another battlefield, one fought not with guns and cannon, but with sorrow, love, and the raw, unrelenting pain of human imperfection. The brother shifted, hesitated, and finally stepped back, creating a fragile space between them, a space that neither trust nor forgiveness could easily cross. And in that silence, the soldier felt the weight of every letter that never arrived, every lonely night endured, and every unspoken truth that had grown into a secret capable of destroying everything he had fought to return to. He was home, but home was no longer a place of comfort. It was a battlefield of hearts, and the war was far from over. She stood in the doorway, trembling, her hands pressed together as if holding herself together from the inside. The soldier looked at her, searching for the woman he had loved, the one who had promised to wait. But the face that met his gaze was not the same. It was haunted, weary, and unrecognizably changed. Time and absence had sculpted her into someone he barely knew. For years, she had lived in a strange limbo. Each day, she tended the home they had built together, yet each night, she wrestled with despair. Letters she received months late or never at all became fragments of hope and despair, each arrival a bittersweet reminder that he might not return. She cried for him, whispered his name in the darkness, and yet the world demanded she move forward. And move forward she did, but not as she had imagined. Loneliness is a slow, patient thief, stealing certainty, confidence, and resolve. It nudges you toward choices that would have seemed impossible in the light of love. The soldier's brother had been there, a comforting presence, a hand when she fell, a voice in the silence. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and what began as solace quietly became something more, a forbidden closeness that neither wanted, yet both needed. When the soldier returned, she did not immediately recognize the life that had been hers. She had rebuilt it in pieces, using fragments of hope and fear as mortar. And in that fragile reconstruction, the lines between duty, love, and survival blurred beyond recognition. The man she had promised to wait for had returned, but the waiting had already transformed her heart in ways she could not undo. She remembered nights lying awake, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, wondering if he would come back or if death had claimed him. She imagined his face in every shadow, every stranger, every flicker of candlelight. Fear and love collided inside her, shaping a decision she would regret or defend for the rest of her life. Yet when she saw him standing on the porch, all those emotions, love, guilt, longing, fear, collided at once. Her heart ached with the knowledge of what she had done and the impossibility of undoing it. She wanted to run, to hide, to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. Silence became her shield, her confession whispered only in her eyes. The soldier's gaze, sharp and incredulous, pierced her. The world she had tried to protect with small, careful acts of survival seemed to crumble under that stare. Each heartbeat was a drum of accusation, each breath a reminder that love could not be paused, delayed, or rewritten. She had waited, but waiting was never simple. Waiting had changed her, shaped her, broken her, in ways even she could not fully understand. In the quiet of the house, the air thick with tension, she realized the terrible truth. Love is not always enough to conquer absence. Survival sometimes demands choices that defy morality, reason, and even the human heart. And when the soldier finally stepped through the doorway, she understood that no explanation could fully bridge the chasm that had grown between them. The scent of the garden, the faint warmth of the hearth, the whispers of the past, they all seemed to mock her now. She had loved, she had waited, and she had endured, but time had its own rules. And in breaking them, she had become both victim and accomplice in a tragedy she could never fully escape. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Inside, a different storm raged, quiet, invisible, unrelenting. It was the storm of human hearts tested by absence, desire, and impossible circumstances. And in that storm, the soldier and his wife stood, two souls forever changed, facing the impossible truth. Waiting is never simple, and love cannot always survive the void of years. News travels fast in small towns, especially when it is soaked in scandal and sorrow. By the time the soldier had stepped into his home, whispers had already begun to swirl through the streets of their Virginia town. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, children pressed their noses against windows, and every step he took seemed to echo in the collective conscience of a community that loved stories more than truth. It began quietly. A passing comment at the general store. "I thought he'd never come back." Then another, sharper, more accusatory. "Did you see her? She's changed." Rumors, half-truths, and speculation spread like wildfire. People whispered about loyalty, about betrayal, about the brother who had stepped into a home that was never his to claim. Every glance, every muted sigh, every sideways look became a verdict, and the soldier could feel it pressing down on him even before he confronted the truth himself. The small town had always been a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Yet, now it felt suffocating, as though the walls of his once private life had become a stage for judgment and scrutiny. Mothers tugged children away, men lowered their eyes in awkward shame, and even strangers offered cautious greetings, unsure whether they should speak or flee. In the evenings, the whispers became sharper. Footsteps behind doors, the clatter of chairs, and muffled voices floated into the night. Each sound was a reminder that his return had disrupted more than just his household. It had fractured the delicate balance of a town that thrived on appearances and old routines. People chose sides, sometimes without knowing the full story. Allegiances were tested, loyalties questioned, and morality debated in hushed tones over fences and hearths. At the heart of the storm was his wife. She felt the weight of every glance, every whisper. Her own shame and fear became magnified by the judgment of others. The whispers were relentless, as if the town itself had become an extension of her guilt, punishing her for surviving while the soldier was away. And yet, even in the darkest hours, there were those who saw her pain, who understood that love and survival often collide in ways the world cannot forgive. The soldier, meanwhile, sensed the town's eyes on him. Every step he took toward understanding, toward confronting his brother, was shadowed by judgment. It was as if he were not merely reclaiming his home, but walking through the court of public opinion, each whisper a verdict he could neither escape nor fully understand. One evening, as the wind rattled shutters and the scent of rain crept through the town, a neighbor approached cautiously. Her voice was low, trembling, as if speaking too loudly might shatter everything. "We didn't know, we thought," she faltered, leaving the sentence unfinished. The soldier understood immediately. They had all assumed, all whispered, all speculated, but assumptions are dangerous in a world already fractured by war and loss. In a town built on closeness, where no secret can remain hidden forever, the private tragedy of one family became public fascination. Every whispered story, every sideways glance, every tentative question added another layer to the soldier's pain. It was no longer just about betrayal and grief inside the walls of his home. It was about the way the world outside judged, punished, and reshaped the truth according to its own moral compass. And so, as night fell and shadows lengthened, the soldier realized that the battle for his family was only beginning. Not just against betrayal, not just against absence, but against the weight of 1,000 whispered judgments, echoing through a town that would never forget the scandal of love interrupted by war. The air inside the house was thick, heavy with unsaid words, guilt, and tension. Every creak of the floorboards underfoot sounded like a drumbeat counting down to the inevitable. The soldier stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on his brother, whose posture was tense, controlled, yet betraying the slightest tremor. Between them hung a silence, so loud it pressed against their ears, a silence full of anger, confusion, and the weight of everything lost. He wanted answers. Every step he had taken in the war, every hardship endured, had led to this confrontation. He wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand an explanation, but the words felt too small for the enormity of his grief. Instead, he let his gaze do the talking, an accusation sharper than any sword, heavier than any cannonball. His brother spoke first, voice low, careful, as if every syllable could ignite disaster. I didn't know if you'd come back," he admitted. "I only tried to keep things together." The words hung in the air, insufficient but undeniably human. Behind them were fear, regret, and the quiet agony of love twisted by circumstances neither could control. The soldier's chest tightened. He wanted to believe, wanted to forgive, but betrayal cuts deep, and the wound was raw, pulsating, impossible to ignore. He remembered nights spent dreaming of home, imagining her smile, her touch, the life they had promised each other. And now, the life he had returned to had shifted, warped by absence and the choices made in desperate survival. The wife watched silently, her hands trembling, heart pounding like a drum in a storm. She had been caught in the middle, a silent witness to a war that had never truly left her home. She had survived, yes, but survival had come at a cost that now hung between the two men, electrifying the room with tension. Words were inadequate. Emotions overflowed in heavy silences, in glances, in trembling breaths. The soldier remembered the letters that never arrived, the nights when she waited, the months of uncertainty, the endless ache in his chest. His brother's presence, once comforting in her absence, now felt like a knife twisted slowly, deliberately. Finally, he spoke, voice cracking, sharp with grief and fury. "How long? How long has this been?" His words demanded truth, but even as they left his lips, he feared the answer. The revelation, whatever it might be, could fracture everything beyond repair. His brother's eyes met his, haunted, remorseful. "Months, maybe a year," he admitted quietly. "I try not to, but she needed someone. I try to be there for her. It wasn't meant to hurt you." The soldier's hands clenched into fists. Anger, sorrow, and disbelief collided inside him, threatening to overwhelm reason. He wanted to strike, to punish, to reclaim what had been taken, but he also understood the impossible human needs that had driven them. Pain and love, loss and survival, all tangled into one horrifying, heartbreaking knot. The room seemed to shrink, suffocating under the weight of history, choices, and consequences. Outside, the wind rattled shutters, a reminder that the world continued, uncaring, while hearts were shattered within. Rain tapped at the windows, echoing the soldier's pounding heart, each drop a silent witness to a confrontation years in the making. At last, silence returned, Not peace, but a fragile pause. Both men understood that the battle for resolution would take longer than one confrontation. Forgiveness, if it came at all, would be slow, measured, and painful. And somewhere in the shadows, the wife's grief echoed, a quiet lament for a love that had endured absence, yet could not survive the twists of fate and human frailty. The confrontation had begun, but the war at home, between hearts and loyalties, was far from over. The house never felt the same after that confrontation. Each room, each corner, held echoes of the argument, whispers of betrayal, and the heavy weight of grief. The soldier wandered through it, seeing everything he had loved, everything he had fought for, now tainted by absence, silence, and human error. Home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield of memory and regret. He could not sleep. Nights were long and oppressive, filled with the hum of distant insects, the creak of floorboards, and the haunting shadows cast by flickering candlelight. Every sound reminded him of what had been lost. Not just the life he thought he would return to, but the innocence of trust, the simplicity of love unbroken by war. His brother tried to atone in small ways, but the air between them remained charged. Silence had become a language of its own, each unspoken word a reminder of failure, guilt, and the impossible choices that had led them here. He could not bring himself to hate entirely, but neither could he forgive fully. The threads of family had been stretched to their limit, fraying with each passing day. The wife, too, was changed. The woman who had waited, who had survived, now carried a quiet burden that no one could lift. Her eyes held sorrow and guilt, her hands often trembled, and her voice had a hollow quality that betrayed sleepless nights and endless worry. She loved them both, yet that love had been tested, twisted, and reshaped by the cruel hand of circumstance. The townsfolk continued to whisper. Every outing, every visit, every errant glance seemed to carry judgment. Children asked questions that could not be answered. Neighbors offered advice that could not mend the heart, and even familiar faces seemed to shift in ways the soldier could not trust. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to the ruin left in the wake of private tragedies. Yet life demanded resilience. The gardens still needed tending, the hearth still needed fuel, and the rhythms of daily survival did not pause for grief. The soldier returned to chores, to work, to the minutiae that once seemed so mundane. But now, each task carried the weight of memory, the shadow of betrayal, and the ache of what could never be fully reclaimed. In quiet moments, he replayed the past. The war, the letters that never arrived, the days spent imagining her smile, the nights of loneliness under a sky that seemed impossibly vast. And with each memory came a sharp pang, a reminder that survival does not always guarantee restoration, and that some wounds, once inflicted, linger long after the battle is over. His brother, too, was trapped in a cycle of remorse and longing. Each day brought small acts of penance, yet none could erase the choices made in fear and absence. The house, once a place of laughter and warmth, now carried a subtle chill, a reminder that human hearts are fragile, and even the closest bonds can shatter under strain. And so, the family moved forward in a fragile equilibrium. Days were measured, conversations cautious, emotions tempered. Love remained, yes, but it was layered with fear, suspicion, and the haunting knowledge that one wrong word, one misplaced gesture, could reopen the wounds of the past. Shattered lives are not always loud, dramatic, or public. Sometimes they exist in quiet, private spaces, echoing in footsteps on wooden floors, in sleepless nights, in whispered apologies that go unanswered. And in this house, in this town, in this family, the echoes would last a lifetime, reminding all who live there that war does not end on the battlefield, and that the greatest battles are often fought in the hearts of those who survive. Even as the seasons changed, the soldier could not escape the ghosts of the past. Autumn leaves fell in fiery spirals outside the window. But inside, memories clung to him like shadows that refused to fade. He could still see the smoke rising from distant battlefields, smell the gunpowder and mud, hear the cries of comrades lost forever. War had left marks deeper than scars, marks that followed him home, into the very rooms that were supposed to bring solace. Nights were the worst. Candlelight flickered against the walls, casting long, dancing shadows that reminded him of fleeting moments of happiness, now tainted with betrayal. He would lie awake, imagining the letters he had sent, the words that never reached her, and wonder how different things might have been if only fate had been kinder. Each memory was a knife, each recollection a wound reopened. He saw her face in the darkness, eyes wide, lips trembling, holding herself together as she had all those years. He saw his brother, standing silently, a constant reminder of what desire and loneliness could do to love. And he saw himself as he had once been, young, hopeful, naive enough to believe that surviving war guaranteed a happy ending. Outside, the wind carried the whispers of the town, rustling through trees, rattling windows. Even the natural world seemed to echo the turmoil inside him. The soldier began to realize that the battlefield was not behind him. It had followed, creeping into the corners of domestic life, into conversations, into glances, into moments of quiet intimacy that now felt fragile and dangerous. He walked the garden at dawn, hands brushing over petals and leaves, each bloom a reminder of what he had returned to and what he had lost. The roses he once planted with her hands seemed smaller now, their fragrance muted, as if they, too, mourned the innocence that had been stripped away. Even the air smelled different, damp, heavy, carrying the scent of rain and earth, but tinged with something sour, the residue of grief that lingers long after tears have dried. Sometimes he would catch himself staring at the horizon, imagining the lines of smoke and fire on distant battlefields, wishing for the clarity of purpose that war had provided. But clarity had its price, and now the price was heavy. A home tainted by secrets, a love tested by absence, and a family fractured by decisions made in desperation. He tried to forgive. He tried to move forward. But memories are persistent, insidious things. They whisper in the night, appear in dreams, tug at the edges of consciousness when least expected. He could never fully reclaim the past, nor could he erase the knowledge that the world had shifted in his absence. The war had ended, but the war in his heart raged on, invisible, unrelenting. And in those quiet, haunted hours, he understood something painfully simple. Some wounds are permanent, some betrayals cannot be undone, and survival does not always equate to peace. He was alive, yes, but at what cost? Every heartbeat was a reminder of what had been lost. Every breath a testament to the fragility of human trust and love. The past would never release him. It followed him in silence, in whispers, in fleeting glimpses of shadows on walls. And as the soldiers stared out at the Virginia horizon, he realized that the ghosts of war and the ghosts of the heart were not so easily laid to rest. Time passed, as it always does, but the echoes of that summer in 1865 never fully faded. The soldier, his wife, and his brother continued to live under the same roof, bound together by blood, love, and unspoken guilt. Yet every glance, every word, every small act carried the weight of that fateful return, the day that reshaped their lives and left scars that would outlast them all. The townsfolk never forgot either. Small-town memories are stubborn. Stories pass from one generation to the next, growing with each retelling. The soldier's home became a cautionary tale whispered in corners of the market, at church gatherings, and around hearths on cold nights. It was a story of love interrupted, trust broken, and the dangerous power of absence. Some said it was betrayal. Others said it was survival. But no one could deny that the family would never be the same. Inside the house, life moved forward, but carefully, deliberately, like walking on broken glass. Each person learned to navigate the fragile relationships with precision. Words were chosen for safety, gestures measured to avoid reopening wounds. Even laughter, when it came, carried a hint of fear, as if happiness could vanish the moment it dared to show itself. The soldier, once full of hope and dreams, carried a quiet bitterness. He loved still, yet his love was tempered by caution, by the knowledge that even the closest hearts could falter when left alone. His wife, though devoted, bore the weight of choices made in absence, a silent burden that sometimes cast a shadow over every tender moment. And his brother, haunted by his own secret and the consequences of survival-driven decisions, moved through life with careful humility, aware that redemption was never guaranteed. The garden outside remained a silent witness. Flowers bloomed, seasons changed, and the world continued its slow, indifferent march. But the soil, rich with history and memory, seemed to hold the ghosts of the past. Each plant, each bloom, carried with it a whisper of longing, betrayal, and love that had been tested beyond endurance. Even children who were born later could feel the weight of history. They grew up sensing the tension in the air, the fragile threads that held the family together, and the invisible lines that could break with a single misstep. The legacy of betrayal had seeped into the very fabric of the household, shaping lives in ways that could not be undone. The soldier often wondered about fate, about how absence and silence, combined with the frailty of human hearts, could unravel what was once sacred. He thought about the choices made in fear, the longing that turned to desire, and the fragile balance between love and survival. And he understood something that would never leave him. Life is not always fair. Love is not always constant, and the consequences of absence can ripple across time in ways no one can predict. Virginia's sunsets continued to burn in brilliant hues of red and gold. But for this family, every sunset carried a shadow. The past was always present, a quiet companion in the corners of rooms, in the echo of footsteps, and in the silence of nights too long to bear. The legacy of betrayal was not a story of hatred, nor a story of vengeance. It was a story of humanity, of hearts tested, of love strained, of survival intertwined with regret. And as the soldier, his wife, and his brother moved through the years, they carried with them the knowledge that some wounds, some choices, some betrayals are never fully healed. They are lived, endured, and remembered, forever shaping the course of lives and the fragile beauty of what it means to be human. The war had ended years ago, but the battles at home, within hearts and memory, would endure for a lifetime.